Welcome, everyone. I'm Steve Paikin, co-host of the onpoli podcast on TVO.
I'm John Michael McGrath, co-host of the onpoli podcast.
I'm Sabrina Nanji, founder of the Queen's Park Observer.
And I'm Émilie Gougeon-Pelletier, Queen's Park Bureau Chief for Le Droit.
Today on the pod, it is the home stretch of Ontario's 44th general election campaign. We'll take you through some of the stories capturing attention with less than a week to go till Election Day.
Despite polls showing a big Conservative lead, there are still some tight races worth watching. We'll take you through some of them.
The Liberals find themselves having to explain some questionable tweets by some of their candidates.
And we've had the Northern debate, the province-wide debate, and 2 days ago, the French language debate. We'll tell you how that went and where it could have an impact.
And in your column, my column, I'll look at some of the promises made by the Liberals and NDP in their platforms out today.
And I've got a column up on a candidate trying to make history, Aislinn Clancy in Kitchener, and we'll tell you why.
It's Friday, February 21st, 2025, so let's get to it.
Friends, nice to have you here. We should do a little explaining. First of all, we do this always off the top. A little sugar off the top. We do this. This is our thing here. Yeah. Amen. Beautiful. Yeah. That was not well done. We should do that again at the end.
Sorry.
Should have practiced that ahead of time. Anyway, we had a couple of guests join us, right? Jesse and Charlie from the Trillium last time. So we thought it seemed to work reasonably well. So we thought we'd have Émilie and Sabrina join us this time for a little discussion about the provincial election and a lot of discussion about last night's hockey game. Because that was, Émilie, you watched it, right?
Amazing.
Wasn't it phenomenal?
Amazing.
And I'm wearing my 2002 double gold medal Canadian Olympic hockey gold jersey from 23 years ago. Sabrina and John Michael, what did you think of the game last night?
You know very well I did not watch.
That is, Sabrina, did you watch the game?
I confess I didn't either, but I did hear a lot about it this morning. I know we won, and that's all that matters.
It was nice to wake up to the reaction the morning thereafter, and you know, a lot of really good dunks on Twitter. I enjoyed that.
I can hop on the bandwagon.
It was nice to have a reaction while it was happening, though.
Yeah, that's very good. Can I, I'm not sure I can express how profoundly dead to me you are right now. And not
That's
only
it. Podcast canceled.
Like, you're not only not wearing anything related to our fantastic Four Nations victory last night. What is that shirt and what language is it in?
It's just another one of my Godzilla t-shirts in Japanese because, of course, like any red-blooded man, I just picked the shirt that was at the top of the drawer, man.
Well, the game was fantastic. It was a wonderful thing. Try putting tariffs on that, you Americans. Okay, anyway, there's a little local angle on the game last night, which we should talk about here, because they did bring out the trophy at the end and gave to Sidney Crosby, the captain of Team Canada, who passed it along to, who did he pass it? Brad Marchand, who plays for the Boston Bruins, so that was his home arena. So, and it's always a significant thing. Who's the captain going to hang the cup to first? That trophy was designed by a guy from Belleville, Ontario. Robert Greer is his name. Huh. So I love that little Ontario angle in the Four Nations face-off tournament. And
they're bringing it home.
It's still our friggin' game. Oops, did I say that out loud? Okay, there we go. There we go. Do you want to bring those pictures up? Let's bring those pictures up. Okay, there's Marchand with the trophy above his head. It's really quite a beautiful trophy. It's not the Stanley Cup, but nothing else is. So there's Brad Marchand from the Bruins and Team Canada last night. And there's the guy. That's Robert Greer with the trophy that he designed, and he's from Belleville, Ontario.
Cool.
Anyway, that's a thing of beauty. Now, one other thing we have to do here, we do like to correct the record, because occasionally, I know you won't believe this, we actually make mistakes on this podcast from time to time. I know it's impossible to believe. Last week at this time, JMM, I think we were talking about the fact that we were showing a progressive conservative election ad.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of shots in that ad of Doug Ford driving.
Getting behind the wheel of a car, yes.
Not a car, a truck.
Truck, yes.
His truck. And I made the comment, because this has been the case for as far back as I can remember. The Ontario Provincial Police do not allow premiers to drive their own vehicles for security reasons. And so I said they probably just did that for the ad, because I doubt that the premier's allowed to get behind his own wheel. Well, guess who I heard from this week?
Did you, in fact, get a call from Premier Doug Ford?
I got a call from the Premier, who called me up, and, you know, when he calls, it says no ID, right? So when you see that, you think, okay, something's up here. He called me and he said, and he was very disappointed. He said, oh, Steve, ask the OPP. I drive my own vehicle. I said, how is that allowed? I thought for security you're not allowed to. He says, I have one car in front of me. They're right beside me the whole time, but I insist on driving my own truck, and they let me. So we correct the record. PC Party leader Doug Ford, apologies for the mistake, but we do correct the record here. So there you go.
We regret the error.
Yes, we do regret the error. Anything else on that?
No.
Off to the races we go. Off to issue 1. With less than a week to go before Election Day, the parties are pulling out all the stops, leaving no stones unturned in their efforts to win Ontario's 44th general election. Let's review some of the homestretch efforts the parties are putting out there. JMM, come on in.
Right. So Bonnie Crombie has spent much of the past week trying to entice NDP voters to vote Liberal. This was a pitch that began really on the night of the debate, the province-wide leaders' debate. We mentioned on Tuesday that there's some issues with this strategy. The math is questionable. Let me put it that way. Even if half of the New Democrats change their votes, given where the polls are right now, the Liberals would still struggle to actually get out in front of the Tories because the lead is currently so large.
Could come second, though.
Yes. And they would pad out their caucus, which is always nice to have.
When you've been in third place for the last 7.5 years, that's not bad.
And they would be an official party again. So, meanwhile, Marit Stiles is fired back at Crombie, saying earlier this week that the Liberals are just trying to guarantee their official party status, which, as we say, they have lacked for the last 2 elections. Stiles is pitching her party to Toronto voters, vowing to fund half of the operating costs for the TTC, bring in rent control policies, and give a grocery rebate as part of an affordability pitch. And then in the final stretch, of course, I think it's fair to say that the two opposition parties at this point are spending about as much time duking it out with each other as they are with the actual majority party.
And I bet Doug Ford loves that.
Yeah, I mean, well, we know that when, the anti-Ford vote is split, that helps Doug Ford. And the Tories have been making a lot of effort to keep, their front-runner candidate, the PC leader Doug Ford, out of the spotlight. He has not taken our questions for 9 days before this Thursday, where he was, forced to address a lot of controversies in the past week. One big thing was his comments about sending people straight to Sparky and his affinity, I should say, for capital punishment. Not something that's necessarily in his wheelhouse. This was a leaked audio. He sort of doubled down on it and said it was a joke, but he is taking this tough on crime stance. I mean, obviously, the Ford has put his foot in his mouth a few times during this campaign, so keeping him out of the spotlight has been working in his favor. I mean, obviously, he's the guy to beat right now. And meanwhile, we've heard from people in the Tory war room who say that the only candidate Doug Ford is afraid of is Doug Ford himself. And so really to not screw this up, this lead that he has that the polls are telling us, is to really just stay on message and not get, knocked off track by his opponent. So I think that's part of the strategy of keeping him away from reporters who, I should add, are just limited to 6 questions when he, on those occasions he is talking to us.
6 questions and follow-ups, or just 6?
I think that's 6 people, right? So 6 reporters'
people.
questions, yeah. But
Got
that
it.
whole 1 question, 1 follow-up, I know you've complained about it before, Steve, that choreographed dance is not the best for getting the truth out from these guys.
Amen. Well, we have talked on this program, John Michael and I did last week, about the Northern Ontario Leaders Debate. We had the province-wide English language debate take place earlier this week. And then a couple of nights ago, Émilie, we had the French language debate. Now, it wasn't with the leaders, so who was at it?
It was Caroline Mulroney for the Tories, France Gélinas with the NDP, Lucille Collard for the Liberals, and Michelle Peterson for the Greens.
So 4 female candidates, and how did it go?
Right. It went the same or almost the same as you would expect as the leaders' debates, really. Obviously, we were expecting Caroline Mulroney to hammer on the importance of Protect Ontario and, the PC's messaging, especially on the economy, on protecting the workers, protecting, Ontario in the face of tariffs. Caroline Mulroney's edge, it's interesting because she was the president of the Treasury Board at the dissolution, so she knows exactly what amount of money goes to which ministry and why. And so it's interesting to hear her talk about the economy because she has that specific type of knowledge. You have the Liberals' flagship promise to provide a doctor to every single Ontarian in this province. But Lucille Collard, her specialty is education. And so that showed also during the debate. She raised the question of decrepit schools and the need to repair them and build more schools. And then you have Rangelina with the NDP, who was her party's health critic at the dissolution, and her northern and francophone perspective really came into play during that debate. It's very interesting because she knows that those specific communities have an even more reduced access to healthcare. And you have Michelle Peterson with the Greens, finally, who's a social worker. So she focused a lot on the social issues and social services and on her party's promise to cut the taxes for lower and middle income earners and, taxing the rich and putting people over profits.
Let me ask you one follow-up. Did anybody obviously help themselves with their performance at the debate?
That's a good question, and honestly, I would ask the question back about the leaders' debate. There's so many similarities there, and the messaging are just being repeated over and over and over again. So, I don't know. It's a good question.
Can I ask, not to put you too much on the spot here, but I mean, this is obviously an English language podcast. Francophone voters care about healthcare, they care about education, they care about a lot of the same issues that anybody else does. But is there an issue for Francophone voters in your mind that wouldn't be obvious to English-speaking Ontarians?
There is the question of long-term care, healthcare, and at-home health that was raised recently. That's very interesting. Is you get a healthcare worker coming into your home, you have to make sure that they speak your language, especially for a lot of people that when you get to an older age. For a lot of them, there's dementia that can settle in, and it's known that when you start going to those illnesses, you lose the second languages or the third or the other languages, and you retrieve back to your first initial language. So that's why it's so important to have access to somebody that can speak the language that you speak. And that's kind of the case for a lot of issues. Education, same thing, justice, health, even housing, social housing.
It's been a big story in the province for 155 years.
Absolutely.
Services in the French language where numbers warrant. Yep. Okay, and with that, we're off to issue 2. While we keep hearing that the PCs are leading in the polls right now, there are still going to be some tight races on election night province-wide. JMM, let's start this off. What ridings are you taking a look at?
A bunch, but the one that has stuck in my mind lately is, we've discussed it before, Sault Ste. Marie riding. I will be keeping an eye on election night. The NDP launched their campaign there, and the Progressive Conservatives have faced a lot of criticism for their candidate being an out-of-towner for succeeding Ross Romano, who was the MPP for the riding before the dissolution. It will be very interesting to see that. The Liberal candidate in that riding has now criticized Bonnie Crombie for not turfing the Oshawa candidate. It's getting very, very complicated there. I'm sure somebody else will want to talk about the Oshawa issue. But seeing a little bit of Liberal fratricide there. Toronto St. Paul's, we've mentioned before, you wrote a column about Stephanie Smythe, who is the Liberal candidate there. It was held before the dissolution by the NDP's Jill Andrew.
Twice?
Yes, twice. But before that, it had been a Liberal territory since the Earth's mantle had cooled. So it will be interesting to see if the Liberals can take that back. And then in the 905, of course, we're going to be looking at Mississauga East Cooksville, where Bonnie Crombie has said she will be is the Liberal candidate there. Very much a make or break situation for the Liberal leader. If she does not win that seat, it will at least bring into question her future leadership of the party. We saw what happened in the last election where, on top of the disappointing results for the Liberal Party in the last election, Stephen Del Duca also did not win his seat, and on election night he certainly announced the end of his time as a Liberal leader at that point.
Yeah, the reality is it looks like Halton, Peel, and York Region tend to vote as a bloc. And I think probably going back to when the seats first achieved the borders that they now have, 1999, they tend to give all the seats to one party. So that's why you're raising the issue of whether Crombie could win what she hopes will be her own seat in Mississauga. There is something called the Quadra effect. And this is where I get up on my soapbox and remind everybody that I'm a lot older than all of you. Because back in 1984, John Turner led the federal Liberals to their worst showing ever. They just got smoked by Brian Mulroney, who won the biggest majority government in Canadian history. And John Turner was trying to lead a renaissance of the Liberal Party in Western Canada. And so he decided to run in British Columbia. There were no Liberal seats west of Ontario, except for Vancouver Quadra in British Columbia, which John Turner won. And he won it because people in that riding wanted to say, you know, John, you're not going to form the government, but we respect what you tried to do. So even though you're surrounded by orange and blue, we're going to give you that one little seat. And maybe that could happen in Peel region this time, which certainly at this moment looks like it's going to go completely blue. But you never know. There could be a quadra effect in Mississauga, East Cooksville. So there we go.
Oh, thank you for educating us.
There you go. What are you looking at?
Well, I wanted to tell you about my personal favorite, Parry Sound Muskoka. JMM, you wrote an interesting analysis on the issue recently of housing in that riding. And I've been watching this race for a couple of elections now because it's so very unique to have a fight between PCs and Greens in this province. And in the last general election, the Liberals had dropped their candidate after it was discovered that he had published a book in which he had made unfounded comments on homosexuality. So that left the door wide open for the Greens candidate, Matt Richter, who's been running in that riding since 2007. In 2022, the last election, he secured more than 40% of the vote, but ultimately lost to PC candidate Graydon Smith, who we know now to be a minister in the PC government. Mind you, that riding, Parry Sound Muskoka, has been blue since its creation in 1999. And remember, that was former Ontario Premier's riding, Ernie Eves.
That's right. Yes, indeed. Okay, what are you looking at, Sabrina?
I mean, man, you guys took a lot of the good ones. But yeah, there's a lot I'm paying attention to too. In, I guess, the Toronto area, I'm looking at Eglinton Lawrence. I think from what I hear from, people on all sides of the aisle, that's probably the most winnable pickup seat for the Liberals right now. Obviously, it was very close within just a couple hundred votes in 2022. There's no NDP candidate there. The NDP candidate strategically dropped out, basically just throwing in the towel before the beginning at the last minute, just before the deadline. So there isn't going to be a dipper on the ballot at all. And
how could that affect things?
I mean, well, we know that vote splitting is a thing, right? In this country, in this province. And so when the so-called progressive vote, people who tend to vote NDP or Liberal, when they, are divided, then that benefits Conservatives. And so, that's obviously not lost on Doug Ford. It's interesting because there was also a Liberal dropout in Windsor West, another area where the PCs have been gunning for really hard. They launched their campaign in Windsor. They've been talking a lot about border issues. It's a border town. So Eglinton Lawrence is one I'm looking at. They're running Vince Gasparo there, the Liberals. He's a star contender, and the PCs don't have Robin Martin running again. That was their incumbent. We know incumbents tend to have a leg up on the ballot, so that's a race that I know the Liberals are pushing and the PCs really want to hold on to. And I'm also looking at York Southwestern. They're the PC. It's a PC seat. Theirs to lose. The incumbent Michael Ford is no longer running. That is Doug Ford's nephew. It was a very close race in 2022 again, and the NDP is running Faisal Hassan, who was the former MVP who lost to Michael Ford in 2022, and now he's back. So those are two potential flips, I think.
I'm wondering, how many more times should I let her say incumbent before I correct her? What do you think?
Well, the MVP before, I guess technically.
Former sitting member.
Let's get into the
this is
technicality.
This is one of the few pet peeves that well, I don't know if you have
I also
as well.
say Rit dropped, so I
Oh my God.
But it's like an album.
How
It's
did
like
you
an
get
album,
invited here today if you say Rit dropped and incumbents? No, we're not going to pick up any more Americanisms, especially nowadays. So
But you're right. The
former
MVP,
sitting member.
The MVP, yes, at the time of dissolution.
There we
you're
go.
right.
I like that better.
And so, essentially these are PC seats to lose because they were theirs before dissolution. And so now I think that the NDP and the Liberals could flip those. And then I guess just more generally, I just wanted to mention like blue-orange swing areas too. There's like this interesting cross-section of voters we have in Ontario that flip between Conservative and NDP. And those are places like Windsor, the North. If I can say like typically blue-collar heavy populations. And I think this is part of the PC's playbook, the reason why they're pumping up a lot of these union endorsements. That's like one of the things that a lot of PC insiders attribute to their bigger majority win in 2022. And while they are picking up a lot of union endorsements on the private sector side, they are obviously, using those same tactics in places like Niagara and London and Windsor and the North to try and poach some of those seats from the NDP. So that's my whole spiel. I'm basically looking at everything.
I think I'm trying to remember last election, was it 8 seats the Conservatives managed to take away from the NDP?
I would have
Something
to
like
double check that, but that sounds, I think that's right.
Which was pretty astonishing. I mean, I don't think that's ever happened in my lifetime before. Well, 2 ridings that I am particularly interested in, you won't be surprised to hear, are in my hometown of Hamilton. In 2022, Sarah Jama won Hamilton Centre for the NDP. She then had some rather controversial things to say about the war in the Middle East, and as a result was kicked out of caucus. She is running for re-election as an independent, and the NDP have a different candidate there as well. So again, apropos of what Sabrina just said, if there is a vote split by the progressive candidates, does that open the door for somebody else to take that seat? That's Andrea Horvath's old seat. That's been a very safe NDP seat for a long time. But again, if you've got massive vote splitting among progressive candidates on the left, you never know what could happen there. The other one I'm going to be taking a look at is Hamilton East Stony Creek. Neil Lumsden, the Conservative cabinet minister, won the seat with less than 35% of the vote 3.5 years ago.
Splits, right?
Talk about vote splits. That's right. He got 35% of the vote, not even, and still managed to win the seat because the others were bunched so closely behind him. There was an independent candidate who ran there last time, the former sitting member, Paul Miller, full disclosure, my cousin. He got 7% of the vote. And that 7% of the vote that he got, that normally would have gone presumably to the NDP, really hurt the NDP and allowed Lumsden to come up the middle and win it. So, I'm going to have an eye on that one because I suspect it'll be a late night in Hamilton East Stony Creek as well. Anything else?
I can toot my own horn
Yeah,
here
sure.
for a minute. I actually had a little scoop in the newsletter this week about the NDP hiring canvassers to go door knocking in Hamilton Centre, which is the seat that Sarah Jama held. And while all parties are doing, or at least the Conservatives are doing that too in certain areas like London, they say this is not totally unusual to hire canvassers, but I think it's just a big hint of where the NDP are really trying to shore up their support, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And with that, we're off to issue 3. You can pretty much set your watch to it. It seems that during every election campaign, federal or provincial, at some point it will emerge that some candidate somewhere said something or tweeted something inappropriate, offensive, or just outright stupid. JMM, we've got a bunch of examples that have become known over the past few days, so why don't you take us through some of them?
Right. So one of the most prominent ones, one of the first I think that the Progressive Conservatives flagged was Ontario Liberal candidate Brian Hamilton, who I believe is a city councillor in Thunder Bay, is the candidate in Thunder Bay Superior North. He had some tweets defending Jian Ghomeshi and some others where he called Taylor Swift a word that I cannot repeat here on TVO. But
Rhymes with rich?
Yeah, it starts with a B, rhymes with rich.
Okay.
And then there have been others, another Liberal candidate, this one in Ottawa Centre. And I guess we're going to hand this one to you, Emily.
That's right. Thomas Simpson, the PCs released a tweet from 2012 where he said that consent is not sexy. This one seemed to be a bit more nebulous because he hasn't issued a public apology or an explanation regarding this old tweet. There could be some explanation around the context, but we don't know this. We do have a clip, I'm told, from Bonnie Crombie where she says Simpson has apologized to her. We haven't seen this apology for his comments, and then she goes on the offensive on Doug Ford, which is pretty common.
Let's take a look at that.
Of course, he was a young man and he understands that that is not appropriate and not tolerated, and he has completely apologized, withdrawn his statements, and he's made those apologies. But they want to sling mud. If Doug Ford has something to say to me, he should have the balls to say it to my face. That's what I'm saying to him right now. You got something to complain about? Come to me. Show your face. Where has he been?
Okay, gotta say, as a tactic, that was pretty clever. She heard the question, she made dealt with the criticism, then pivoted and put it right back on Ford, and using some language that you knew would be guaranteed to get her some attention, which it did.
That's exactly why I say it's pretty common. This is seems to be the pattern of what she's been doing with all these candidates whose dirty laundry has been aired out. But it's also interesting to remember the 2022 election when Stephen Del Duca had some candidates who had their dirty laundry aired out, but he let them go from the party. So it's interesting to see this new strategy of, her standing by and deflecting to Doug Ford. But there's also the part where the Liberals are at a disadvantage here in this dirt digging attack campaign, considering they're the party with the least amount of former sitting members, notwithstanding the Greens, obviously. The PCs had their, most of their notable dirty laundry aired in the 2022 election. Remember Stephen Lecce and Will Boma, notably.
You say when you remember that, and I don't. And I bet most people don't. And I'll tell you why. Because there's so much of this stuff nowadays. I think we get inundated by it. And my hunch is I was going to ask you, Sabrina, what's the impact of all of this, if any?
I mean, the PC war room has been very busy
Yeah.
sleuthing the internet. The skeletons are in the closets and they're going to find them. But it really feels like they're just digging up dirt. There was one they pulled up like a 20-year-old blog from a Liberal candidate, Jason Cherniak, in Aurora, Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill. And he said in that, the Liberals, we don't compete for votes on the left. And they pulled that up the day that Bonnie Crombie was appealing to NDP voters to consolidate the anti-Ford vote. So it just seems like they're throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. I don't know if this is going to actually stick. I mean, in some cases it is. We had the NDP candidate in Elgin, Middlesex, London drop out after her comments, were revealed, her saying that she wanted to be a Black woman to have the experience of, addiction and
she
poverty.
is not a Black woman.
Right. Yeah. She's a white woman. And so, I mean, that statement is just problematic for so many reasons. And so she's dropped out. Right. But I do think that it's interesting that Bonnie Crombie is taking this different tact than Stephen Del Duca is. She's saying that, this was a long time ago. They've apologized and that's good enough for her. I don't know, if this is really going to be that damaging because, some things, a lot of, as Emily pointed out, some things were taken out of context. Some people have already apologized. I think the one thing that's probably going to be the most damaging is this Oshawa fellow who had, as Crombie put it, offended two communities in one shot, right? Like the LGBTQ community and the Sikh community. And now we've seen, the calls coming from inside their own house with another Liberal candidate over in Brampton asking for this guy to be removed as a candidate, the one in Oshawa. And so I think that this just plays into the conservative line that the Liberals aren't ready, for prime time. They're not serious, that they have all these problems with vetting. How can we trust them in government? But at the same time, it kind of feels like inside baseball, things that we're going to talk about here on this podcast and maybe not so much, at the doors with real people. Yeah.
Well,
not that we're not real people, but
not really real people. Exactly. No, the reality is, if you've got a lot of money, as the Conservatives do, and if you have not been a recognized political party at Queen's Park, as the Liberals have not been, so you don't get all that extra money for research and so on. Yeah, and these guys, you're right, they have been scouring the internet for decades and decades to look for crap on, of silly things that previous Liberal candidates have said, and I bet if they scoured our tweets of the past 15 years, they'd find some stuff that we regret saying as well.
That's why I delete my tweets.
I mean, I'll never run for office. Too many skeletons in the closet. But I'm surprised, that even the candidates themselves didn't kind of catch this or do their own, self-assessment. And
They're supposed
the
to do
internet is
that.
forever. And yeah, it's kind of surprising, but at the same time, not really.
They're supposed to, they do ask you every time you run for office. The last question they ask you is, have you done anything embarrassing or anything that could bring disrepute under the party? And you would think I think John Gomeshi is a pretty cool guy, and I agree with his position on male-female relations.
Right.
That might be a bit of a tell, right?
Red flag.
Yeah, red flag is right. Okay, that's enough for that. Off to your column, my column. Okay, it's time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns we wrote for our website, tvo.org, over the past week. What do you want to focus on this week, my friend?
As of today, the Liberals and New Democrats have both released their platforms. So I am going to be just writing for the website, less of an opinion piece and more just highlighting some of the big changes that are being proposed. The NDP have revived their perennial promise to bring in proportional representation, replacing the first past the post system here in Ontario. no surprise that the NDP want to bring that in, though I do remind people that it's an option that the voters of Ontario did reject in a 2007 referendum. Maybe times have changed. We will see. They are proposing very substantial tax increases on higher incomes, like 200, 300, and 400,000, 300, 400, and 500,000 annual incomes. The other one that I wanted to flag was they want to increase the inclusion rate for capital gains taxation. This was a big issue federally over the last year or so, and in fact, the federal Liberals have basically backed off of that proposal. So we will see whether this plays out similarly here in Ontario. The Liberals have also released their platform. They are proposing $36 billion in new spending for a variety of measures, healthcare spending, these kinds of things. Obviously, healthcare spending is just intrinsically very expensive, the biggest line item in the budget. They say they are going to pay for some of these new costs by not building, as they refer to it, the Fantasy 401 tunnel, among other measures that they will not be pursuing from the PC government. And yeah, for the rest, people have to go to the website.
I want to know what you think about the fact that we're less than a week to go till Election Day, and two of the major parties are only now bringing out their fully costed platforms.
Yeah, that's bonkers to me. I mean, I know this was a snap election, but the rumors were there, and it, for the Greens to be the first party to do it, we say it all the time. The Greens punch above their weight. They don't really have, a shot of forming government. I mean, I guess, I'm not sure if stranger things have happened, but I guess anything is possible. But yeah, I think it's a disservice, obviously, to the public, right? They're making a lot of these big spendy promises and not really showing us the math on how to pay for it all. I mean, I've still got to be digging through their platforms from the NDP and the Liberals, and it sounded like we're also getting a costed platform from the PCs, which isn't typical. And it seemed like Doug Ford had said that wasn't coming, and now it sounds like he is. From what I hear, it's going to essentially just be like a version of the budget documents that we usually get when they were government. But yeah, I think it's really unfair for a lot of, to be asking voters for a bigger mandate. And, one of the big promises, the tunnel you mentioned, John Michael, like we don't really have a price tag on that. I don't think we're going to get a price tag on it. Maybe not even a price tag on the feasibility study for it. So I think that is, unfair for the public.
We're not going to get a price tag on it because it's not going to get bills. But.
That's another story. What do you think about this? I mean, to some extent, I understand why the progressive conservatives are not bringing out a fully costed platform before Election Day, because they have been trying, let's face it, they've been trying to play peekaboo with the media and releasing very little information, making their leader unavailable to media for questioning for quite some time now. He will in Washington when he goes down there, but apparently he hasn't been doing much of it up here. But the Liberals and the New Democrats, who are actually trying to be the next government as well, presumably by showing that we do things differently, waiting till 6 days to go until E-Day before bringing out platforms? What's with that?
I still believe that the PCs should be in the same group of people that we are going after for a costed platform. Because
For sure.
Obviously, the writ has dropped. The government is
Can't
not
say that, Emily.
in place
It's like
at,
an
at
album,
this
like
moment.
when you drop an album.
The writs have been drawn up.
I
We
don't
don't
even know
drop
what a
them.
writ is.
They are drawn up.
But especially considering we have an advanced poll right now, actually, from the 20th to the 22nd of February. How can voters know and go and make a enlightened decision without even knowing the cost of all the promises from each party? But we have been targeting the Liberals and the NDP and saying, if the Greens can do it, everybody else can do it. But that also should include the Conservative Party.
Absolutely.
The last election, they didn't do it because they said, oh, we have a budget. We look at our budget. These are our promises. This is what we're going to do. But this time there wasn't a budget. So come on.
And they did win in
Show us the
2018
money.
with an uncosted platform too. So the Conservatives.
Much of which
It's
was
worked for
Patrick
them
Brown's.
in the past. Right, exactly.
Good. Okay, well, let me tell you about the column I wrote this past week, and I want to focus on Kitchener. Why am I focusing on Kitchener? Because the Greens have a chance to make history in Kitchener. Aisling Clancy won a by-election there about 15 months ago. But of course, in a by-election, and it did happen in Kitchener Centre, they brought Green support and resources from all over the country, to that one little riding in hopes of getting Aisling Clancy elected, and it worked. She had almost 50% of the votes in that riding, and she won. But that's a by-election. It's another thing to do it in a general election when the Greens are fighting in 124 different ridings across the province. So I managed to talk to Clancy. She was out on the campaign trail. She said, I'll give you 15 minutes on the phone. I'm knocking on doors like crazy. So we spoke, got her off the campaign trail for a little bit. But if they do manage to hold that seat on Election Day, that will be just the second time in the history of the province of Ontario that the Greens will win a general election seat. The first being, of course, the one not too far away in Guelph, which was Mike Schreiner's. So that's why I wrote about that.
Can I just say this? We talked about Toronto St. Paul's earlier and bringing all the resources for the Green Party in this riding. But Toronto St. Paul, the last election, Jill Andrew had the help of none other than Jagmeet Singh helping her door knocking. I remember this, and I wonder this time hasn't been around. Maybe his popularity is a little bit lesser than
You think?
totally.
You think? I'm not sure he'd be a help if he were going to go into the riding nowadays. No, that's for sure. Okay, now you two don't necessarily write columns per se, but we do want to keep an eye on what you're doing. So, Sabrina, anything you want to highlight on your website?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit before. The NDP and the PCs hiring canvassers. I was paying attention to where they're hiring them, and the PCs are hiring in London. Also, they hired a company to hand out flyers too, pumping up their candidates there. So I think that's one area they really want to poach from the NDP. And the NDP's canvassers are being paid to go door knock in Hamilton Centre, in London. Again, I think that's going to be a very competitive race in that area. In Sudbury too, which the PCs are also gunning for very hard, and in Toronto. So I think that's a lot of people. It's interesting you brought up Jagmeet Singh and whether or not he's a drag on NDP popularity, because a lot of people are musing about whether the NDP is just in save the furniture mode as we see the Liberals sort of overtake them in the polls for second place. And then just one fun thing I want to add, exclusive in the newsletter, is the candidates' playlists.
Oh.
So I asked the leaders what they're
That was
listening
good.
to.
Yeah, that was good.
A lot of Chapel Roan from Bonnie Crombie,
Yeah.
Relevant, I would say young and relevant for the cool kids, and a lot of Dolly Parton, which surprised me. Doug Ford I did not hear back from Doug Ford's team about what he's listening to, but I'm sure it is this podcast.
Could be. Okay, Émilie, si nous pouvons pratiquer notre français, qu'est-ce que nous devons lire à votre site web?
Okay, I'm going to respond in English just so the
Good idea.
auditors are
I just
aware.
wanted to show off that I can speak that much French. That's
That was
all.
perfect. I do have an article out today about the Assemblée de la Francophonie de l'Ontario, which is an advocacy group for Franco-Ontarians, that sent a survey to the four main parties to know about their priorities for Franco-Ontarians. And the Liberals sent all their answers in English only and not in French, as opposed to all the other parties. And so that's on our website today, ledroit.com, ledroit.com, and on our app as well.
Fantastic. And your website, Sabrina?
It's qpobserver.ca.
There we go. Hey, thanks a lot for joining us. This was a joy.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you.
Good to have you two here. JMM, we still have one task to perform, and that is we want to open up the mailbag.
Go into the mailbag. If you have any burning questions or insightful comments, you can send it along to onpolitics@tvo.org. We have an email this week from listener Blake Stewart, who writes to us about the Eglinton LRT. Blake writes, "Am I missing something? Why is no one talking about this unfinished $1 billion over-budget, overdue project for which no one is being held accountable?" Blake Stewart.
$1 billion? Blake, you're not up on the latest numbers. This is well more than $1 billion over budget. Marit Stiles has said that on day one, if she's elected, she would tell voters exactly when the LRT will open. But it's been radio silence on that topic from everybody else since then. What is going on with this thing, which of course is 100 yards away from our studio right now, and which was approved by the Wynne government and was, I think, supposed to be built for, I think the initial estimates were $5.5 billion, and we're well north of 12 now. So anyway, what's going on with this thing?
This is one of those cases where the people who know are not talking, and the people who are talking do not know. Because if you are in government, and you would have to be in government to know with any kind of precision when the crosstown is going to be ready to open. But talking about that stuff in public gets you into potential legal trouble. This is a project that has already been riven by lawsuits, and I actually can't even remember if the most recent lawsuit has been settled or not. So I can understand why Premier Ford, who is in fact still leading a government, is not going to get into details about this. And unfortunately, the opposition parties, just speaking generally, are just not able to access the information they would need to be able say, for example, when I'm your premier, I will absolutely open the crosstown by July 1st or whatever, right? They just couldn't make that promise because they don't have that information. I assume it will open at some point.
I had a bit of intel on that last year. I had gotten a peek at some cabinet documents from Metrolinx, a very sneaky leak, I should say, that I had. And Cabinet was preparing for the opening in December 2024, which obviously did not happen.
Yep.
But even those Cabinet documents basically said we're about 80-90% sure it's going to open December 2024. So even then, Cabinet wasn't working with like a finalized date. And I believe it was our colleagues at the Star that suggested that, they do know more about it, but potentially might not even want to open it around this time during a campaign when there could be, problems with operations once it opens. So yeah,
Nothing works perfectly on day one.
Right, exactly. And so I don't know if, the Conservatives necessarily want to wear that if there were issues in the middle of a campaign with this project that is just so over cost and over timeline at this point.
Where are all the brown envelopes from Metrolinx? That's what I want to know. We need a place.
On it.
Yeah, I always love it when these places leak like a sieve, but they're not real. They keep everything very tight there, so we really don't know what's going on, and it's a shame. And they were of course told not to say anything, right? At a certain point, Phil Verster, the former CEO, stopped having press conferences. He was told by the government, no more information, that's it.
Right. We were supposed to get updates every 3 months, and then it was radio silence.
Right on.
Yeah.
You want to give the email address one more time?
Right. Once again, if you have any questions about content on the show, you can email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
There we go. That is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, February 21st, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available, and you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first and last name and where you're from.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by David Irwin.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
We want to give special thanks, as we always do, to our beautiful crew here in the studio for making the video version of this podcast happen. We want to thank you guys for joining us as well today. This was a nice change. And until next Tuesday, election week, everybody. Bye-bye.